Midlife curious? I hope you are. I'm Debs Vries, and what I want to say to you is that midlife curiosity is a really good thing. I came into this work accidentally in some ways, although you might say it was an accident of birth. My mother, her twin sister, and my cousin died at the ages of 51. And the illness that they succumbed to was ovarian cancer and breast cancer. But the question that it left me with was, how does nature, who I loved and trusted so much, how has nature decided that these women seem to be disposable? Is that true? Is that really true, that after the age of 50 or so, a woman's worth is suddenly worth less? And this was a question that haunted me, you could say, until I was around the age of 48 and very, very suddenly came to my own midlife crisis. And I became very curious. My GP, my general practitioner, my medical practitioner, and my Chinese doctor all told me that I was in something called perimenopause, and I didn't have a clue what that meant. Over the intervening nearly 20 years, so as I'm speaking to you, I'm in my 65th year, I have dug in, researched, and developed what I believe to be a very comprehensive understanding of the midlife passage as it relates to a woman. And I found that it's so much deeper and richer and more exciting than I could ever have believed. Yep, when I was that terrified 48-year-old thinking that the end of the world had come, I had no idea what lay before me. And more importantly, I didn't know how to move forward. So the reason I'm speaking to you and the reason that I want to promote the idea of midlife curiosity is to say to you right now, whatever's going on in your life, there are other pathways, other vistas, and a much perhaps greater and more beautiful and expansive and enchanting second half of your life ahead of you. So I'm inviting you now to join me on that journey and listen in to some more of the information and insights, some of the magic and mystery that I'm going to share with you. So I'm Debs Vries. I'm a holistic midlife mentor, and it's my pleasure to guide you through your second spring. Hello, hi, it's Debs Vries, your holistic midlife and menopause mentor. And the topic I'd love to share with you today is that of the 5 menopause myths. Now, my experience has been that menopause has been and is constantly getting quite a bad rap for all kinds of awful things that happen to women around their midlife time. And it's absolutely true that there are a lot of symptomatic ailments and problems that arise around that time. But I was curious about this and I asked myself, is it really the fault of menopause, or is there perhaps something else going on? So let's just dive in and examine those 5 myths, and I'm going to give you my take on some alternative views. So, myth 1, I am going to get fat at midlife. I'm going to get fat and I'm never going to be able to shift the weight. Well, that certainly is a lot of people's experience, but is it really because we're in this period of changing hormones that it happens? One of the reasons that we start to increase, if you like, in our weight around that time is stress. So coming towards your midlife, it's really important to examine not just the short-term stresses, but actually the long-term stresses that we tend to live with and get used to. That could be money worries, it could be familial issues, it could be concerns over job or house security, and they simmer in the background. Now, the biology, the neurochemistry of this is such that over a long period of time, our body continues to produce a certain kind of hormone, which if we don't use it, actually sort of run or fight, all of those things, you know, gets stored. It gets stored around the midline because the body's smart and it knows that this is a very vulnerable part of us. The guts, the digestion, if we haven't got energy to burn, we're in trouble. So this sugar gets stored as fat around the belly, and it does become quite difficult to shift, and it's often called the sort of classic jelly belly. And you can work hard, you can exercise, you can change your diet, but it doesn't shift. Is that the fault of menopause? I don't believe that's the fault of menopause. I think that we reach a point in our life where what I call the band of tolerance tightens. And if we don't learn how to loosen that, then our body is going to take, shall we say, evasive action. I am an individual who is quite small. I'm 5'3". I would say my body shape has changed, but my overall weight has not fluctuated very much. And one of the ways that this has been managed, if you like, for me, is by actually really listening to my body and not going into some direct method. I was going to say of attack, that sounds a bit mean, but saying to my body, you're the wrong shape, you shouldn't look like this, you shouldn't want to eat that or this or the other thing, and kind of forcing it. Because around midlife, it's really important to start having a communication with your body. It's going to want different things, and if we insist on trying to push it in a certain way, it's going to be like a mule, it's going to kick back. Certainly our metabolic rate seems to slow down. We're dropping in estrogen, we don't run around as much, and one of the ways that I've managed that is actually changing my methods of exercise. So I don't do intense exercise, oddly enough, because that can create inflammation in the body, which then creates more of these steroidal hormones, which then go into the belly. What I've discovered that works for me is a really consistent approach to weight-bearing exercise, which goes to help towards preventing osteoporosis. Weight bearing does not mean lifting weights, so that's a good thing. It means doing things where you bear your own weight. So walking, skipping, certain forms of yoga are all going to help you. Be consistent, do little and often. Rather than do like a 90-minute blitz in the gym, I find, for example, 25-minute brisk walks a day has really helped me to maintain a very similar body weight to that I had in my 40s. In terms of food, it's probably true that we need less. I'm not going to get drawn into calories. I'll probably be very unpopular for saying this, but I have heard physicists saying that calories were a measure that was designed for understanding how much calorific value was in, say, a piece of wood or a piece of coal. And my understanding of that is your body does not actually recognize what a calorie is. It recognizes the intrinsic nutritional value of something, which is a much broader thing. So for me, that's been an exploration into what my body really likes and really doesn't like. And I have also adopted quite naturally a sort of 2-meal-a-day approach. So one of the important things about that, and from the perspective of my yoga teaching, is that it's important not to eat in the last 3 hours before bedtime if you can possibly avoid it, because you're taking all this partially or undigested food to bed with you, and that is going to be hard for your body to deal with. So I tend to eat a lightish fruity breakfast, then followed by something a bit more protein and substantial around the middle of the day, 10:30, 11 a.m. And then I'll have had plenty of fluids, and then again about 4 or 5 o'clock I'm hungry and I eat my next substantial meal. So I'm eating less than I did, it's true, and I look back into my 40s and I see the great plates of pasta that I needed then. I don't need as much now. So I'm not saying that menopause isn't a trigger time, it really is. And if you find yourself being really drawn to comfort foods, there's always an underlying reason that you are. It could be a nutritional deficiency. And remember that vitamins alone are not the whole answer. If your body isn't getting enough minerals, it cannot absorb and use vitamins correctly. It could be an underlying emotional need that you are managing by eating. So the fact that we want to eat more, or we're eating things that we know are going to create more weight in our body, is often linked to an underlying emotional unexpressed need that menopause by its own nature will force to the surface of your awareness. So can you change your weight after menopause? Of course you can. Absolutely, of course you can. I think what's important to focus on here is how you feel good in your body by your own internal standards, and not to fixate perhaps on somebody else's a culturally or socially acceptable ideal of what they think you should look like. I just want to give you a little story about that. I was at a networking event a few years ago. There was a lady speaking. I would say by my standards she was probably twice my size. In the UK I'm a size 10. I don't know if that helps. I think in the US that might be a 6. And she was an 18. And she was in her power. She was standing there, she was talking to the audience, her hair was glorious, she was laughing, she was smiling. The two guys next to me kind of were like looking at her, and one of them turned to me, he said, "Oh man, I wish I'd married her. What was so great about that woman was she was just so happy in her own being." And that's really a message I'd like to leave you with, is about how happy are you truly in your own being. And if it comes down to having to cut and paste your life so that you are adhering to some ideal, perhaps there are aspects of the rest of your life that need to be expanded to bring you that joy. And very often when we start to bring in joy, when we start to detach from some of the heavy, dutiful things, naturally our need to eat reduces. So it's worth also looking at what's happening when you're eating. What are you thinking? Where are you? What are you feeling? Have you allowed yourself to get too hungry? Have you denied yourself something nutritious that you're not having in favor of something you've been told is great for you? As ever, talk to the people you know and trust, your medical provider, the person who helps you with all aspects of your fitness, by all means. But ultimately, I'd encourage you to bust the myth that you will get fatter or heavier after menopause, and that you will never be able to shift it, because I'm a very low-tech person, and I've found that that's absolutely not been true for me. The changes I'm happy with. I'm a different shape, but I'm also pretty happy on the inside. So just to leave you with that idea that you can expand your thinking around weight and see it more as an invitation to understand why your body would hold on to something, and what it is that you need to be asking yourself that's really going on, that's causing perhaps you to either be too stressed, eat too much, or even just be suppressing emotional needs. Hope that's helpful. See you soon. Hello, hi, I'm Debs Vries, and I'm a holistic menopause mentor to curious, determined and bold midlife women. I'm talking now about myth number 2 in the 5 menopause myths conversation, and it's this. This is one I hear as much as any other myth, and it's this: I'll never feel like myself again. And that is a very sad place to reach, unless you know that there's a you that you're going to feel into, that you will feel like, that is even better and more expressed than the you used to know. So let me just expand. When women say to me, I just want to feel like myself again, I completely know what they're saying. I want to go back to where things are certain, where I knew myself, where things weren't funky, where I didn't feel a bit strange, a bit weird, a bit disconnected, where I wasn't questioning, who have I become? I want to go back to a place where I know how I connect with my family, my intimate partner, my workplace, and I'm safe. In effect, we're saying that me is the safe version of me that I know, and this me is a very alien and strange self that isn't me. I remember that for myself really clearly, thinking, oh my God, who's this woman who just got out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, ready to run downstairs and scream and holler because somebody was on the phone for too long. And in the morning I thought, ooh, that wasn't me. I've come to realise that actually was me. Because who was doing it? There isn't some alter ego within us, in a sense, unless there's a clinical reason that we are suffering from a condition that is doing this. So the mystery is, why do I not feel like myself anymore, and how do I get back there? Well, the first reason we start not feeling like ourselves is actually quite simply because we're changing. You could say, rather than change, more of us is emerging. Ever since you were an embryo, you have been in the process of emerging. And yes, there's a solidity to your body that doesn't continue to emerge in quite the same way, but there are aspects of yourself that are still rolling through and always will do. Becoming very familiar with yourself in that, if you like, the first half of life is a wonderful thing, and it's natural to feel at least concerned and possibly disturbed when you stop feeling the way that you did. It's been familiar and now you feel unfamiliar. What I want to say to this is, it's important, I feel, to connect with those around you and let them know that they're safe and you're safe, but change is happening. The reason I say that is because many misconceptions arise around midlife in intimate relationships. I've spoken to partners who said, I thought my girlfriend, my wife was leaving me. I thought she'd gone off me. I thought she was planning to, leave the country, because they feel the drift. In work, we may become a little detached and people might start looking at each other going, what's the matter? Do they want to leave? In the absence of good information, most humans will fill in with their kind of worst scenario. So if you're feeling it, it's likely other people will have sensed a change at least. It's incredibly empowering to sit down with those people and say, look, I don't know exactly what's going on. I know in my heart I'm still me, and I know in my heart I still love you, or I still love this job, or being this mom, but I can feel that there's shifts and change happening. And I just need you to know it's not about you. In a sense, it's really not about me, but I would like your support because I may not be as available to you in the same way that I was. I'd also like to at least offer you a broader and richer vista, and perhaps I can use the word more enchanting vista, of not returning to the old you. The old you will never disappear. That's a foundational piece. But in these times, you're offered an opportunity to relearn or to discard or to adopt different ways of being that actually are more appropriate and suited. Not you being an old lady, an old grey hair, or you're going over hill now and nothing's. No, absolutely not. It's about clearing a space so that you can refresh. You can push the reset button. And this may take some time because you may be having to grapple with some very fundamental issues: how to run the family, how to manage your job so that you're not so tired, a lot of negotiation needed. So silence isn't your best friend. And that may also come as a surprise to you or to people that know you, because perhaps the old you soldiered on. Perhaps the old you did it all on her own, and perhaps the old you took some pride in that. I'm certainly not condemning. I'm just saying, look at the load that you've been carrying and ask if there is something that you're gaining from that in terms of self-protection, not showing vulnerability, all these kinds of calls to put your burdens down so that this new you, and dare I say this more expanded version of you, can begin to emerge. The lesson I learned from that time was not to be over-wedded to the idea of getting back somewhere. And as I'm speaking to you now, we're still in what could be the final stages, but I'm not sure, of a global pandemic. And perhaps in a very brutal and tragic way, we are learning that the processes of nature actually don't allow us to go back. If you can be at least if not comfortable, accepting of the idea that we don't go back. And allow yourself the opportunity to be at least curious, if not a little bit excited about who you might be in the process of becoming. Then you're going to put down some of the battle and the struggle to get back to being who you were. I would also invite you to consider who you really, really want to be. So in this in-between time, in the midlife, in perimenopause, which is the period from when your estrogen levels begin to fall, roughly 43, 44, to the 12-month anniversary of your last menstrual period, that day is menopause, everything else is peri or around the menopause. In this in-between time, you get a chance to redream yourself. You get a chance to allow your soul to come more centered stage. You know, the first half of a woman's life is often concerned with what I call external phenomena, and a man's life too, but for women we have the external phenomena of conception, pregnancy, and possibly childbirth, for example. We have the external phenomena of bright skin, bright hair, a certain way of being. All these things kind of mark us out. And in a society which tends to glorify youth and encourage us to stay there and chase it, it's probably very difficult for many women, myself included, to imagine being old. And if you imagine being old and it's like my grandma, who I love dearly, but like a grey perm and frumpy shoes, I don't want to be like that. I had to make it up for myself because, as those who know me, I didn't have any female relatives who'd gone past the age of 51. I do have a couple of cousins I've found since who are blazing the same trail, I suppose. But when you look back to who you've always wanted to be, perhaps some of those things have got not sidelined, but certainly put on hold while you've been concentrating on career, relationship, or creating a family, and usually for most of us a combination of all of them, right? Those dreams are still in the wings. It is never too late. Getting back to where you were is going to be a waste of energy, and it's going to mess with your head somewhat. So if you just take from this these ideas that you don't need to go back, you're fine as you are, let people know that you are in a state of shift and change and that it isn't about them, and also open yourself to the opportunities to reconnect with the dreams, the ambitions, and the needs, no matter what size. This isn't about, writing a next great novel, but please do if you really want to. It's about asking, what really brings me joy, and how can I express that joy in my daily life? So I hope that's helpful, because a lot of women say to me, I just want to go back to being who I was. And I love to say to them, I know that you do, but it's not possible, and it's not scary either. Hello, I'm Debs Vries, and I'm a holistic midlife mentor to determined, curious women. And the topic I'd like to share with you today is that of your mojo. I want to talk about how to care for and perhaps reignite your mojo in those midlife years. When I talk about mojo, I'm talking about that vitality, that zest, as a word that encompasses that sort of effervescence, that zest for life we have when we think, gosh, I really want to, rather than, oh no, I'm going to have to. And when that vitality starts to ebb away, we can really lose a sense of ourself, can't we? And in the mid-40s, as a woman's estrogen levels begin to fall, we are quite acutely aware that we do not feel the same as we did. And this in itself can lead to a certain unhappiness or uncertainty about what's happening to me, which in turn can lead us to feel that there's something wrong. And in fact, this is just nature's pause button. You are going through a period of change, and it will balance itself. But once we hit that spot, we can start to almost freak ourselves into thinking, I'm never going to feel right again. And that vitality, that mojo, it can express in so many ways. You might feel the drift from wanting to go out so much. Perhaps you don't feel as intimate or attached to your nearest and dearest as you did. Perhaps the job doesn't fulfill you anymore. Things feel a little bit more dry, a little bit more dutiful, and you're puzzled. Who am I? Why am I not feeling like this? Somebody might say to you, well, 44, 45, estrogen levels are dropping. Like, oh my God, does this mean the end of me? Absolutely, no, it doesn't. But I wanted to give you some pointers around how to protect your life force, your vitality, your mojo, and perhaps how to reignite it. Because doing what you've always done, if it's not working anymore, is not the way to go forward. You have to rethink things at least for a while, maybe a year, maybe 2 or 3 years. And some of the ways that I learned to reignite and protect my mojo were almost going in the opposite direction from what I'd done before. So one of the questions I'd ask you is, how much playtime are you getting? And if the things that you do are not really giving you a buzz anymore, why don't you ask yourself, what is it I've always meant to do? Look back at yourself when you were 15, 16. Why don't I try that? And without any agenda, not trying it to be perhaps necessarily really good at it or competitive or to dance every day or whatever it is, but just for fun. So if you've always wanted to try, I don't know, rollerblading or surfing or dancing or learning a new language or cookery or any of these things, do it for the sake of reigniting your connection to your life force. Because your life force really likes you to be constantly emerging and experiencing different aspects of yourself. Now I know, and I really empathize with the fact that women today are super, super busy. You may have a family, you may have people demanding things from you at work, you may have your own business, even elders that also require your help. And one of the hardest midlife female lessons is how to put yourself on the agenda and protect that time. So one of the ways to look after your mojo as a general thing is to protect yourself, protect your time, set up clear, loving boundaries about what you're available for and when you're not available. I often find with women who come to me for help that there isn't any time actually scheduled for them. And if they have got a blank day and somebody comes along and says, shall we do this or shall we do that? They'll scribble that in because they've got the space. So one of the ways to protect your mojo is to create appointments with yourself. And it really doesn't matter what you do with them. It matters that when somebody calls you or asks you, say, I'm not free until 4 o'clock that day, you don't have to justify why you're not. And in that moment that you've guarded for yourself, you don't have to go and do anything. You can rest. You can make a nest in the sunshine in a quilt. You can lie in the garden. You can read a book. You can take a bath, a nap. I love naps. If none of those are possible because you're working full time, you can still put half an hour in your diary, because most people aren't even taking a lunch break, and go out for a walk. One of the things that will help your mojo is looking after your adrenals. So next to protecting your time, protecting your adrenal health will really help your vitality. One of the reasons for this is the ovaries have these little glands on top, which you probably know, the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands do not have an off switch. They're one of I believe the only gland in the endocrine system that you cannot switch off. Why? Because an adrenal gland is there to keep you alive. It wants you to survive. So every time there's a sense of stress in the body, stress could be just too much noise, overwhelm, the wrong kinds of foods, over-exercising, financial worries, personal worries, all kinds of stuff. those adrenal glands will be working super, super hard. And the topic of adrenal exhaustion I can cover in another discussion. But one reason we don't need the adrenals to get exhausted is because as we go through perimenopause, there's a switch down from estrogen and a move towards the ovaries and the adrenal glands producing another form of estrogen. We need much less in the second half of life because we don't need the growth aspect of estrogen, but we need these little babies to be able to produce estradiol. I'm pretty sure it's called estradiol, and if the adrenals get very, very depleted, we can't do that, and that really upsets the longer term hormonal balance. Now, one of the things that the adrenals like is space. They like it, if you like, because they don't really have to be on high alert then. And most of us are in environments where we've usually got a lot of people around us. Walking. If you can walk 20 minutes to somewhere and walk back quietly for 20 minutes, and preferably without headphones or a phone, just slowly and listening to what's around you and enjoying that, then that will help to deregulate the adrenal glands, and that in itself will help your mojo to come back, because vitality is an aspect of how much extra energy you've got, right? So protecting your time, protecting your adrenals. The other thing to help you get your mojo back is to attend to your sleep. Now, as you probably know, sleep does play a very important part in how our body is caring for itself, how much energy we have the next day, and it comes back to all kinds of things. Appetite, leptin and ghrelin are hormones that are produced during sleep that help to regulate appetite. If you're finding you're not getting the sleep that you need, I strongly recommend that you and I have a discussion at some point about the right sleep approach and program for you, but do not shortchange yourself on those precious hours. And your mojo, if you like, your vitality, part of what comes from that is this ability to go to bed at night, hopefully with nothing much on your mind. So deregulating and getting rid of the blue screens a couple of hours before bedtime, having a journal handy so you can write down anything that's bugging you, take yourself into a quiet space so that you're getting the right signals into the brain to say time to shut down. While you're asleep, your body and your psyche are busy doing other things. They're having a bit of a sort out and a clear up, so when you wake up in the morning, it's a new day. You're not kind of dragging yesterday with you. So protecting your time, protecting your adrenals, protecting your sleep, having more fun, having more playtime. And another very, very big one is learning a powerful no. This can be very challenging at first, but saying no and not having to justify yourself to things you really don't want to do is a really important stage. So in order to protect your space, a good no, a good loving no, thank you for asking me, I sometimes say, that's so lovely of you to think of me, but no, I can't do that, or I'm not available to that, or that's not for me, is probably a best answer. Thank you very much, but that's not for me. Delegation. I want to talk a little bit about this because it's quite misunderstood. Delegation isn't telling somebody to do something and then having to nag them into do it. If you're in a situation where you have family members around you that are capable of basic to more complex tasks, and that can be from quite a young age, then I believe it's really important to start helping them to take responsibility for certain things. So I have a process that I use for that, but essentially it's about having a family discussion, whatever shape or form your family is, and helping them to see just how many things get done around the house and who's doing them. Because you and I know it's not the fairies. You're not getting invisible help, it's usually you. And I'd ask you a self-reflection question here. If you were an employer, would you give yourself all the jobs that you give yourself? Would you work 18 hours a day without a break? Would you take on everything and then wonder why you'd lost your mojo? That kind of works when you've got all this estrogen going, but as soon as we come into the midlife and this band of tolerance, as I call it, tightens, we start to get really challenged. I don't think nature's making a mistake here. Nature's asking us to help the next generation to step up. Delegation is to give responsibility for something to someone with their acceptance, to help them to understand how it's done, and then to stay back. You may still be accountable, but ultimately, once they've agreed the parameters and let's say you've helped them to understand how to do it, stay right back. Do not nag. I cannot tell you how many meals of dried pasta, how many garbage bins didn't get put out, how many lawns didn't get mowed. It doesn't matter. Just choose things that the family's not going to fall over if it doesn't happen. And just gently ask the person who's responsible if they don't do it, how can you remember to do this? I suppose what I haven't said is don't go doing it yourself. It's very, very important to stand back and let the person who's agreed to take responsibility for it see the consequences of that not being done on the family dynamic as a team. So I've just written a couple of things here, and I wanted to just ask you this one last thing. Before you grew up, what really made you smile? What made you feel amazing? And it could be, like me, I get a buzz out of dancing, get a bit of a buzz out of clothes shopping. Not that I like the big shop experience, but I just like to put outfits together. I love to be outside. When you look back to yourself before you grew up, there'll be a ton of things that always just, I hope, made you feel connected and in your own zone, in your own being. Have a look back and ask yourself, what used to make me really happy? And go do that. So just to recap, protecting your mojo and nurturing it is as much about protecting your time, protecting your physical space, learning to push that space out by saying no lovingly, by delegating properly, not nagging. And there's a huge difference, because if you start nagging, you're never going to end up delegating. And to drawing in more of the pleasure principle into your life. So I hope that's given you some inspiration. I'd love to know where you are on the mojo curve at the moment, and if and which any of those tips will help you to just lift your vitality back to a level where you feel really, really in your flow again. Hello, I'm Debs Vries, and I'm a holistic midlife mentor, and I mentor curious, determined and bold women who have just entered their 40s or maybe a little bit further along on that journey and are sensing changes and want to know how best to manage them. My absolute delight is to accompany you on that journey, to save you some of the stresses, the time wasters and the upsets that can come if you don't have perhaps a broad and deep enough perspective of how to negotiate this intricate and sometimes super challenging time of your life. Topic for discussion here is sex. I want to talk specifically about sex in your 40s and beyond, but let's start in that midlife period. As you probably know, estrogen levels begin to fall when you're about 43 or 44 years old, and this can impact your sexual drive, your libido. This in itself can be challenging, upsetting and puzzling, not simply to you, although you are the most important person to me, but also to intimate partners, and we'll talk about that a bit further down the line. The first thing to say is this doesn't go on forever, and the second thing to say is what to do in the interim. When I first hit my perimenopause, my libido dropped off a cliff. I was going through an awful lot of other things at the time, including job changes, trained to be a yoga teacher, managing a divorce, managing a family, and I really didn't have enough energy, I think. And so your vitality and how much energy you're using in other places needs to come under the microscope. But let's just go back to broadening the discussion. And the reason I want to broaden the discussion is because I think perimenopause and midlife is a good time to expand your view of what your sexuality is, what it can be, how it's represented within your intimate relationship if you have one and if you don't have one. And very often the model for intimate relationships is in a should I say a heterosexual relationship I'm talking about, is usually a sexual intercourse, right? More or less. Particularly if you've been together a certain period of time, that is very often the preferred method of connecting sexually. And it can be very distressing when your sexual buttons don't seem to want to switch on. So what I always recommend is looking at different ways to play, different ways, not necessarily to achieve the same ends as sexual intercourse, but to achieve the intimacy that is actually one of the underlying bonuses of being together in that way. And I learned quite early on that finding, for example, other things to do was fun, and that in itself was quite reigniting for my libido. So other things to do included reading or writing, and I did both, erotica. I'm not suggesting pornography, though that's to everybody's personal taste, but erotica is can be very much a lightweight, and it's a really old-fashioned word I'm going to use here, titillating way to remind you of stimulation that doesn't just come through the body, right? So from a tantric perspective, we can be stimulated through our senses, through what we see, through what we smell, what we eat, what we taste, how we're touched. And so taking away the pressure for everything to end in intercourse is actually a bit of a relief. And at the time of my perimenopause, my Chinese doctor said to me, don't have intercourse, it's going to be too tiring for you at the moment, too draining. And I want to talk about why that can be true. So I began to write erotica for fun, and actually it ended up with me recording a whole series of it for a couple of companies and reading it, which was enormous fun, and getting my partner to read it, and we both really enjoyed that. Classic one, of course, is low contact massage. So again, sensual encounters that don't depend on intercourse. That can be difficult for some couples to negotiate, and I just leave it open to everyone to decide what their goal is. But if you consider that the goal is really intimacy, then opening up the discussion is in itself an intimate act. Massage, of course, we love the candles, don't we, girls, and essential oils and all of those things, or even getting a couples massage. I've known many couples find a complete new way to play by involving a professional masseuse to come to the house and just let them both enjoy something at the same time. Although, of course, in Tantra, the giving and the receiving are very much roles that we both parts in a heterosexual relationship need to sit into at different times. I would invite an exploration of Tantra, and I'm not talking about tantric sex, oddly enough, although I'm talking about sexuality, because Tantra is much broader than that, and sexuality is just one way that the tantrics teach intimacy and expansion of consciousness. So couples groups where there's a discussion about sexuality are also a great, if you like, a dish to bring into this buffet of perimenopause shifts and how you can expand your discussion and your intimacy during that time. I would say that things like dance and maybe learning to dance together, that's not always popular, but some people will find that's a really good way into body contact, which is really fulfilling. a movement which the body loves. There's a particular dance form in Europe called Sarok, rock and roll, modern jive, that's really simple to learn and does bring in elements eventually of tango and salsa. Great fun. It sort of broadens your horizons. You can have a lot of fun just dancing in the house to music that you love. Being more in nature, so go outside, light a fire, sit around the campfire, go away for a weekend with a tent, get cold, get dirty, get muddy, sleep in a sleeping bag. You know, these are ways of taking yourself out of your environment, which again is a real jolt to perhaps a way of being that needs freshening up. And make love outside if you want to. Don't if you don't want to. Read poetry to each other. Cook meals for each other. Create erotic dinners. Come home to a very different scenario. Move the bed. Bring a little bit of red into the bedroom. Bring a little bit of red into your clothes. Have a look at how you feel about yourself. What is your self-love strategy, if you have one? What does self-love really, really mean to you? When you start to treat yourself like a princess, a queen, a goddess, all of these cliches go around, but when you think about your body and you're good to it, when you can give yourself a foot massage, when it isn't all about getting your nails and hair done, but you're prepared to sit with yourself and take a bath or say no or suggest something different, your self-love will actually generate a biochemistry in your body that will actually reinvigorate you sexually. Now, sexuality and vitality, they're just pretty much the same thing, aren't they? I mean, each human body is created by the action of a sperm coming into an egg. And that one action creates a trillion cells. So sexuality is not trivial, far from it, but keeping it, if you like, in a box, particularly in midlife, can push us into a sort of polarized view of what we want. Very often I hear women say to me, I don't want him to touch me. And that can feel really cruel and unkind, but perhaps what they're very often saying is, if he touches me, I'm scared that it's going to end in intercourse. So having a conversation, and girls, have that conversation outside the bedroom, in a quiet moment, with a cup of coffee, without an agenda that's like, this is about you, or you're wrong, or I'm really like, can I talk to you about how I'm feeling about something? And this is just because I'm going through these hormonal shifts, but could we find a language that works for us both in the bedroom? I would say, do not start or end a discussion about sexuality in bed unless you're both agreed it's going to be a fun topic. I've touched on Tantra. That is a huge subject, and I'm just guiding you to an exploration of what that might mean to you. But always remember that Tantra itself is about expansion of consciousness. And coming to Tantra just to get sex is, in my humble opinion, not to be prepared for what Tantra can mean to you. So if you go to a tantric teacher and they're not recommending that you're having these conversations, that you're practicing at least a little hatha yoga to prepare your system for the energy that come in, I would step back and go find a teacher who's willing to take you through the stages before you reach the place where they might even be encouraging you to come into a tantric sexual relationship. That's really important. You can kick off such a lot of invisible blockages in your life that it can get totally confusing. So my take on Tantra comes with a caveat, and I mean from the deepest part of me, Tantra is incredibly important to me, but it's not a commodity just to be bought in when things are lagging, in my opinion anyway. Rest. Just enjoy the presence of another person for what it's worth. Enjoy just sitting and maybe watching a movie, but really watching a movie together, maybe talking about it afterwards. Take time out to have like really simple dates, nothing complex, with each other. a coffee date, a bit of a role play date if you like, man and woman meet in a bar for the first time, or you get dressed up in your ball gown for no reason. All these things have been super useful to me, and I would really love to know if there's something that I haven't covered that you'd like me to cover. And I'd also like to remind you that to stay playful and curious rather than to think something really bad is happening to you is a useful choice. So, sex after 40 during your perimenopause period can be a bit haunted by dryness, by some kind of physiological issues. Don't ignore them. Hydration and the right kind of oils going into your diet do matter more as we age, as we mature, but also the relaxation that comes with once the concerns around conception have disappeared. And remember, you can conceive right up until the day of menopause, and sometimes that has happened after. So contraception for both reasons of sexual health and the management of how many you want in your family, those things still matter. But ultimately, I'm here to tell you from the viewpoint of being 65 now that sex gets better. So if you've imagined that you're just going to dry up and be an old prune and never be interested, if that hasn't been true for you before, it's not going to be true for you in the future. So enjoy the opening, enjoy your new smorgasbord, become creative and curious, and as always, communicate in a really non-judgmental way to your partner or to yourself that this is a chance for you to become more 360 in your sexual adventures and practices. I hope that's really helpful.